As the sun starts its slow descent on what was a stunning summer's day on the 10th of June 2017, a phone rings at Enniskerry Garda station. It's 7:43 p.m. A distressed member of the public identifies herself. "My name is Breda Kenny," she says. Her hands are shaking so much she can barely bring the phone to her ear. A quiver leaks into her voice. She sounds alarmed, panicked. She doesn't know what to do. Others can be heard in the background. They sound panicked too. "I'm pretty sure we've just found human remains," she eventually reveals. A brief silence follows. Then, the sound of a keyboard tapping. "What is your location?" she's asked. "We're near a forest, just off Military Road in the Wicklow Mountains, not far from the old Bowley. We were out for a picnic." "Stay exactly where you are. Gardaí will be with you shortly." Breda puts her phone back in her pocket, her hands still trembling. "The guards will be here soon," she assures her family. Earlier, while looking for somewhere discreet to answer nature's call, Breda's niece stumbled upon what she thought was part of a dead pig. Then they came across it again while exploring the verges just off the main road that carves through the rugged landscape. One of their cars had been broken into, and they were searching for a missing handbag. But now, on closer inspection, it was clear the remains were not of an animal. This was a far more sinister discovery. In the ditch below Breda's feet lies what appears to be the upper torso of a human body. Meanwhile, not far from where Breda stands, the sound of the steady roar of an 80-metre-high waterfall fills the air in a mighty valley. Glen McNass waterfall is in full violent flow. A couple walks along the embankment, silenced by the thundering crashing of the water hitting the smooth granite bedrock. The water is discoloured today. In the distance, the couple see what they believe to be the organs of an animal, strewn across a shiny rock. But they are wrong. They are looking at yet more human remains. When someone is murdered in Ireland, the Gardaí call in a team of forensic scenes of crime examiners from the Technical Bureau. For 25 years, I was a part of that team. My name is John Sweetman. I was there to help read the silent and often hidden clues at a crime scene. I saw what killers tried to hide. Fingerprints unknowingly left behind. Murder weapons hidden in plain sight. Handwriting that betrayed a lie. Every detail told the real story. And now, I'll tell you those stories. In this podcast from GoLoud, I take you inside some of Ireland's most haunting crimes. This is Lines of Enquiry, a GoLoud original podcast that looks beyond the headlines, following the evidence step by step and uncovering the stories behind the investigations. In this episode, a crowded house that led to a violent ending. A story that doesn't add up. 5 people and 2 completely different versions of events. This is Lines of Enquiry, Patricia O'Connor, and the House of Secrets. Patricia O'Connor never missed her son's birthday. She didn't have a phone of her own, but she always managed to get in touch with him. He was her firstborn and her only son, and she always wished him a happy birthday. But on the 30th of May 2017, Richard O'Connor turned 44 without hearing from his mother. He still had a lovely day with his wife and kids, but he went to bed that night wondering why his mother had never called. Richard called his younger sister Louise the following day, after having spent a restless night. Louise had broken her own phone and taken her mother's with a promise to replace it, but she hadn't. Richard and Louise didn't really get along, but when he needed to get hold of his mum, calling Louise was the only way. Louise still lived with her mother in the family home, along with her 5 children. Her father, Gus O'Connor, and boyfriend, Kieran Green, also lived there. They also had 4 budgies, a dog called Sammy, and 2 cats they named after David Bowie's glam rock alter egos, Ziggy and Stardust. With just 4 bedrooms and 9 occupants, the house was crowded. The cramped living conditions and unequal division of household chores put a strain on the relationship between mother and daughter. Richard was constantly stuck in the middle between the two, and often advised his sister that the relationship would improve if she rented her own place. Louise had been on the housing list for years, but didn't seem too bothered about moving out. She'd even turned down a perfectly fine house in Dunleary because it was too far from her kids' school and wasn't big enough for her. When he spoke to Louise that day, Richard was quite taken aback by what she said to him on the phone. She told him she hadn't seen their mother since she stormed out of the house the night before. There had been a row. Louise's boyfriend, Kieran, was insured to drive Patricia's silver Toyota Corolla, and there had been a crash of some sort. Louise told Richard that she was in the bathroom when she heard her mother storm out of the house. The last thing Louise heard her mother say was, "I'll be back when that old fella pops his clogs." Then she stormed out the front door and down the steps in the front garden, suitcase in hand. Patricia and her husband Gus were separated but still lived together. Louise figured that was who her mum was referring to. Richard was baffled. He knew his mother Patricia was a straight shooter who would tell you when she thought you were in the wrong or would give you a kick in the arse if you needed one. This meant that she and Louise rarely saw eye to eye, but Richard had a good relationship with his mother, and for her to forget his birthday felt so out of character. Patricia hadn't always lived in Dublin. She was born in Windgap, County Kilkenny in March 1956, a small village nestled between the valleys and forests of southwest Kilkenny. Patricia adored the countryside where she grew up. In fact, she always dreamed of moving back there. So Richard asked if Louise could call their relatives back in Kilkenny to see if they had heard from her. Patricia, or Tricia as she was known to those closest to her, was the 7th in a family of 13. They didn't have much growing up, but they were happy. They prayed together every night before cramming into bumpy bunk beds. Their sheets were made out of flour sacks, lovingly and skillfully stitched together by their mother. On colder nights, she would throw heavy coats over them. Her parents were well known and very well liked in the community, and hard workers with a work ethic instilled in their daughter. In her teenage years, Patricia used to babysit for a few local families. She loved minding children and often dreamed of having her own someday. Patricia moved to Dublin when she was 16. She felt homesick at first, but quickly settled into city life and soon started putting down roots. She met her future husband on a night out in the famous Crystal Ballroom on South Ann Street. Augustine O'Connor was 10 years older, and while they were different in many ways, they hit it off nonetheless. Patricia was working as a cleaner in a hotel off Grafton Street, while Augustine, or Gus for short, had left school early to take up a job as a bike mechanic. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and not long after their first encounter, Patricia became pregnant. Wedding bells soon followed, and after Richard was born, they moved to 66 Mountain View Park, a 4-bedroom terraced house in the suburb of Rathfarnham on Dublin's south side. From the outside, the terraced house didn't look like much, but Patricia fell in love with it the moment she laid her eyes on it. For starters, it was much bigger than her childhood home, and to her delight it had a long garden out the back. Patricia had fond childhood memories of tending to the family garden in Windgap, so she was excited about getting her green fingers dirty again. Mountain View Park was ideally located across the road from Nutgrove Shopping Centre, with various shops and other amenities within walking distance. The stunning Dublin and Wicklow mountains dominated the skyline, which pleased Patricia greatly. She loved the great outdoors. She and Gus welcomed the second child into their home just before Christmas 1978, a baby sister for Richard. They called her Louise. She had red hair just like her mother. Patricia was over the moon. She felt blessed. After all, having kids was all she ever wanted. A few years later, Patricia joined the catering department at Beaumont Hospital. The shifts were long and hard, but she loved it. The team worked together with a great sense of camaraderie, which made the working day more enjoyable. Patricia was a popular member of staff. Over the years, she became very close to one of the hospital's chefs, Breda Wasser. She used to drop Breda home after work, and that's how their friendship grew. Patricia was a breath of fresh air, and Breda was really drawn to her fun, carefree attitude. No matter how busy it got, Patricia always worked with a smile on her face. Breda would hear her coming down from the wards before she saw her, singing and laughing with patients and staff alike. Nobody had a bad word to say about her. She was always on time and never dialed it in, especially with the younger patients. She knew them all by name. The pair became close friends over the years. Patricia trusted Breda. She confided in her a lot. The lifts home pivoted between loud sing-alongs to long, deep and meaningful chats. Patricia told Breda about the breakdown of her marriage to Gus, or the old fella she used to refer to him during their conversations. The age gap proved too much in the end. Patricia married young and later realised she and Gus had little in common. They drifted apart and eventually decided to go their separate ways. The two remained friends and continued living together in Mountain View Park until Patricia met someone else, a woman she worked with. Her new relationship was the talk of the hospital. Patricia soon grew tired of the hushed whispers and sideways glances, so she just announced one day that she was gay, and that put an end to it. Patricia moved out for a period, but after the breakdown of her relationship, she moved back into her house in Mountain View. All she cared about now was working hard and taking early retirement, so she could spend her days tending to her garden. Patricia started doing longer shifts, often working 12 hours at a time. She needed the extra money. The bills were starting to pile up, and with none of the others at home paying their way, Patricia was starting to feel the pinch. In the lead up to her retirement, her friend Breda Wasser had noticed a change in her mood. Things weren't great at home. Louise's kids were getting older, and the extra workload in the house was starting to take its toll. Kieran was becoming a real problem too. Patricia really didn't like having him around the house. Kieran was the father of Louise's 3 youngest children. Patricia didn't trust him and didn't think he was a good father. It wasn't all bad in the house though. Patricia had a special bond with Louise's eldest child, Stephanie. She was 19. Stephanie's dad, a man called Keith Johnson, was still on the scene. He often called over to the house. He was a bit of a handyman and used to do odd jobs around the place, including renovating the downstairs bathroom. Patricia wanted the best for her grandchildren. She didn't want to put them out on the street, but life in the house was stressful. When she took her early retirement in 2016, she began to spend more time in the cramped house and recognised that the others were not helping out much. Instead of tending to her garden, she found herself tidying up and telling her family to move your lazy arses. On the 1st of June 2017, Richard decided to visit his childhood home. His head was spinning as he drove over. He was worried about his mother. He hadn't seen her for a while, but he knew she wouldn't forget his birthday. When he arrived at the house, Louise and Kieran were both in. Gus was there too. Kieran didn't open his mouth. He didn't even blink. He let Louise do the talking. He always did. Richard wasn't interested in talking to him anyway. He'd long since made up his mind about Kieran, a man he described as something of a fool and a moron. Unlike Richard, nobody in the house seemed too bothered that Patricia was missing. Louise didn't even want to report her as a missing person. But Richard was definitely going to the guards, and Gus agreed to join him. A short time later, at the public desk at Rathfarnham Garda station, a helpful Garda scribbled down some notes about Patricia's disappearance. Reluctantly, given what seemed like her lack of interest earlier, Richard handed over his sister's phone number. Louise was to be the Gardaí's point of contact. The guard didn't waste any time getting started. He called women's refuge centres. Nothing. He checked her bank account for movement. Again, nothing. He asked for a recent photo to accompany the public appeal for information. The picture showed Patricia smiling at the camera, her red hair softly curled around her face. The appeal described her as a 61-year-old woman, 5'1" in height, and of stocky build. The family never contacted Patricia's sister, Valerie, who didn't live too far from Mountain View Park, to see if she had had any contact with her sister. It was only when she bumped into Gus while out on a walk that she learned her sister was missing. The girls in Beaumont Hospital couldn't believe it when word of Patricia's disappearance made its way around the wards. No matter what, Patricia always said she'd retire when she turned 60, and she stayed true to her word. And now, not long after taking up that retirement, she was missing. A little over a week later, on the 10th of June, as inquiries into Patricia's whereabouts continued, an investigation into the discovery of human remains up in the remote ridges of Wicklow Mountains was launched. When distressed picnic makers discovered what they initially thought to be part of a pig, but soon realised was a human torso, they called Gardaí. Detective Sergeant Brendan Maher was one of the first officers who responded to the call. When he parked his unmarked Garda car along the road, he was expecting to begin a walk into the woods to find the remains. Instead, the body part lay just a few metres away from his car door, down the sloping embankment. The grass on the verge appeared flattened, which suggested the torso had been thrown from a height and then slid down to its resting place. The colour of the grass didn't suggest that it had been deprived of sunlight, which led the detective to believe the body part hadn't been there for long. There wasn't a very strong smell off it either, which also supported that theory. Detective Sergeant Maher took a note of his observations before calling his superior. The next day, Noel Ruan and his partner were listening to the radio and heard that body parts had been found in the Wicklow Mountains. They thought back to their walk at Glen McNass waterfall the previous day, and how, while they were looking for fish, they had seen something on the rocks along the edge of the water. Something that looked like a stomach. They had dismissed it as animal organs, but after hearing the news on the radio, they decided they better go and take another look and let the Gardaí know what they had seen. On the 12th of June 2017, 2 days after the first body part was discovered, a mammoth search of the Wicklow Mountains was underway. Hundreds of Gardaí and army soldiers were brought in to search the area. Garda divers were also drafted in. Visibility was poor in the Glen McNass River that day, but not long after splashing into its murky waters, Gardaí retrieved something. A human leg. Back on dry land, in an area between the waterfall and the mountain pass known as the Sally Gap, the army found more gruesome pieces of the puzzle. An upper right arm, the right thigh and knee, and the right upper elbow and forearm. Over the course of 4 days, a total of 15 body parts were found in 9 different locations across a 30-kilometre radius. By now, the media had got wind of what was happening. The public was horrified. People wondered if this was yet another casualty of an ongoing gangland war. An incident room was set up at Bray Garda Station. Like those following the news at home, the detectives had more questions than answers. Given the pattern, in terms of how and where the remains were found, detectives believed the body parts were thrown from a moving vehicle. And while they still had no clue what had happened or who was responsible, They did have one crucial piece of information. The victim appeared to be a young man, most likely in his 20s. On the 12th of June 2017, a shifty-looking man in his 30s took a seat in Rathfarnham Garda Station's waiting area. Garda Patrick Foley looked at the clock. It was 7:15 p.m. The man seemed nervous. He kept rubbing his face with his hands. The ticking of the clock got louder and louder with every passing minute. Eventually, the man took to his unsteady feet and made his way across the tiled floor to where Garda Foley was stationed. He wanted to speak to someone in charge. Garda Foley asked him why. "That body, up in the mountains, is Patricia O'Connor," he replied. The man was Kieran Green, boyfriend to Patricia's daughter Louise. Garda Foley had every reason to doubt Kieran's comments, because, as far as he knew, the remains belonged to a young man. But here was Kieran Green telling him they belonged to a 61-year-old woman. Kieran said that there was a struggle in the house they shared, and that he had hit Patricia with a hurley outside the bathroom. As he explained what had happened, Kieran cocked his forearm and brought it down like a hatchet, surprising the Garda with his reenactment. "She fell backwards. There was blood everywhere," he said. Garda Foley called his superior. Detective Sergeant Lucy Miles was nearing the end of her shift when Garda Foley came knocking on her door. When the sergeant spoke to Kieran, he was fidgety and very upset as he told her the stuff up the mountains was me. Kieran told Detective Sergeant Miles that Patricia was his mother-in-law before quickly correcting himself. He and Louise had been together for 10 or 11 years, but weren't married. They had 3 children together. Detective Sergeant Miles was aware that a 61-year-old woman called Patricia O'Connor had been reported missing earlier in the month. She took a note of it. She also took a set of keys to a Toyota Corolla, Patricia's pride and joy. Kieran said that he had used the car to dispose of the body in County Wexford, digging a shallow grave with his hands, and less than a week later he began to panic that her body might be found, so he returned to the field to dig her up. He told the sergeant how he had cut up her body with a hacksaw to make it lighter, and used black bin bags to load the parts into the car, before he drove around the mountains, pulling in 5 or 6 times to scatter body parts, along with his bloody clothes and the tools he had used. While Detective Sergeant Miles listened to Kieran, her colleague, Detective Garda David Connolly, went to check Patricia O'Connor's missing persons file. She had been reported missing on the 1st of June 2017. Her daughter Louise was point of contact. He decided to pay her a visit. When he arrived at 66 Mountain View Park, Louise was visibly upset outside, chatting to some neighbours. She told the detective that her boyfriend Kieran had just confessed to murdering her mother. She couldn't believe it. Detective Garda Connolly struggled with it too. As far as he knew, the body parts found in the Wicklow Mountains were male. Louise described her mother as being very hard to live with. She said her mother had hit her with a teapot on the day she went missing in a fit of rage. Louise told the detective more about that last day with her mother. She went to the park with her father and the kids just to get out of the house, leaving Kieran and her mother behind. Kieran was going to take a shower before following her down. With so many people in the house, she told the detective getting a shower was a miracle. After they had left for the park, Kieran said that Patricia was like a raving lunatic, and she walked in on him having a shower. When the others returned around 9 p.m, Louise said she heard her mother storming out of the house. As Patricia left, she shouted, "I'll be back to get what's mine when that bastard pops his clogs." She figured her mother was talking about Gus, her father. The next thing she knew, Kieran was telling her that he'd kill her. She thought it was some sort of sick joke until he went and handed himself in. Back at Rathfarnham Garda Station, Detectives asked Kieran why he had decided to come clean. Kieran said he just couldn't handle the guilt. It was eating him up. He revealed more about what had happened in the house on that fateful day. He said Patricia was upset because one of the cats got into her bedroom. He said she just lost it, claiming nobody listened to her, and just kept calling them all leeches. He said she'd left with her suitcase, telling them she'd be back when Gus popped his clogs. According to Kieran, Patricia returned to the house about midnight. He said he was having a shower when she opened the bathroom door and came at him with a hurl. We were both struggling, he explained, and the next thing he remembered was waking up on the ground with her lying dead next to him. He figured she must have banged her head on the tiles. In a panic, he said he dragged her body to the upstairs bedroom before bringing her back downstairs a short time later and into the car. At this point in the interview, Kieran broke down, so it was decided to call it a night. They'd pick up where they left off in the morning. Back at Mountain View Park, Detective Garda Connolly was looking for anything to support Kieran's story. Gus had let him in, and with his permission, the detective went straight into the downstairs bathroom and got down on his hunkers to inspect the floor. Kieran reckoned Patricia lost maybe a cup or so of blood, but Detective Garda Connolly couldn't find as much as a smudge. The place was spotless. The guards also spoke to Louise's daughter, 19-year-old Stephanie. She had lived at 66 Mountain View Park her whole life. She affectionately referred to Patricia as Nana. On the good days, Nana was great, she said, but her bad days were terrible. Stephanie also remembered her grandmother storming out of the house on the night she went missing. Like her mother, she recalled how she said something like, "I'll be back when he kicks his clogs." Stephanie's father, Keith Johnson, didn't mince his words when the guards asked him what he thought of Patricia. He said she had a foul mouth on her and claimed she used to pick on Gus. Keith had lived in the house for about a year in 2006 before he and Louise broke up. About a year later, she started seeing Kieran and she got pregnant shortly afterwards. A few days after Patricia stormed out, Keith did a bit of work in the house, fixing the shower step in the bathroom and some broken tiles. While doing the work, he had a thought that he could potentially be cleaning a crime scene. "I just had this nagging thought in the back of my head," he explained to the detectives. Kieran was watching cartoons with his kids when Detective Garda Connolly picked him up from his parents' home the following morning. As promised, he had agreed to return to the Garda station to answer more questions. "Let's start from the beginning again," Detective Garda Connolly said. "Tell us everything. Don't leave anything out." In this second recounting of the story, Kieran said he was on the toilet when Patricia burst in. Just one day earlier, he had told Sergeant Miles that she had walked in on him while he was in the shower. Aside from that, the rest of his story didn't differ too much from the original. After bringing her body upstairs to her bedroom, he said he went to the toilet and vomited. He then mopped up the blood on the tiles near the shower step where she fell. Nobody in the house stirred while this violent struggle took place downstairs, or when Kieran carried the limp remains of the 61-year-old woman up and down the stairs by himself. Achieving this was a bleeding miracle, according to Kieran, considering Patricia weighed more than he did. Detective Garda Connolly had his suspicions, but pushed them to one side and let Kieran tell his story. After bundling her into the boot of the car, Kieran said he just started driving south until eventually he parked in a small alcove where there was a broken gate leading into some sort of crop field. In the dark of night, he dug a shallow grave with his bare hands and a stick, lifting away the dark topsoil and placing her in the ground before covering her up with muck. He soon became convinced that a local farmer would find the hastily dug grave, and he decided she had to be moved. Figuring he wouldn't be able to lift her out of the dirt by himself, he returned to the site with a hacksaw, which he used to chop her up. "I spewed a few times," he told the detectives. When he was done, he put her body parts into black bags, loaded them into the car, and started flinging them into ditches up in the mountains. While Kieran was confessing in Rathfarnham Garda station, the search of the mountains was still underway. It had resumed at first light. A 40-strong search team advanced slowly in a horizontal line, all eyes locked on the rough terrain below their boots. Just after lunch, Army Private John Curtis walked into what he described as a funny smell. A few more steps revealed the bottom part of a torso, including the pelvis, along with what appeared to be women's underwear. Unconvinced by what Kieran was telling him, Detective Garda Connolly asked Kieran to take him and his colleague to the site of the shallow grave. Kieran agreed. There was little chat in the unmarked Garda car as they made their way to Blackwater, a small village in County Wexford. Kieran directed them from the back seat. He was a bit disorientated when they came off the motorway. Everything looked different in the daylight. They drove slowly down the narrow country roads until they came to a gateway on the side of a road in Killee. Kieran told them to stop the car. "We're here," he said. "That's where I buried her." Kieran was told to wait at the gate. While slowly and carefully walking through the vast cornfield, the Gardaí came across some disturbed earth in the area Kieran had indicated that they'd find the shallow grave. Some human hair was all that remained, and a small piece of fabric caked with dirt. Kieran hadn't been lying. He was arrested on the spot. From the early stages of this investigation, Gardaí were concerned with a male victim. But those initial findings were not based on DNA analysis. Bone measurements taken from the first body parts led to the conclusion that they were dealing with a young man until this new discovery. The next thing they found in the search was a black plastic bag tied with a knot. Inside was a badly decomposed human head. A female head. Word quickly filtered back to the incident room at Bray Garda Station. It was not a man's body after all. An updated appeal for information was made through the media. The focus of the investigation team quickly shifted to identifying the woman. Who was she, and what exactly had happened to her? By now, the incident room was aware of Kieran Green's arrest. With most of the body parts now discovered, Gardaí were satisfied that they were dealing with one individual, potentially Patricia O'Connor. A sample of hair was taken from the head and sent away for DNA analysis. A request for Patricia's dental records was also made. Patricia always had a smile on her face, but in her later years she had become very self-conscious about her teeth, so she had decided to get them done. It was a grueling process, but Patricia was thrilled with the results. Little did she know that the smile she had worked so hard for would later be used to identify her in her own murder investigation. Patricia's dental records were handed over to a special oral surgeon who was asked to examine the relevant body parts in the mortuary. A positive dental identification was established. It was Patricia. Following his arrest at the site of the shallow grave in County Wexford, Kieran was taken to Bray Garda Station for questioning. It was decided that Detective Garda Connolly would lead the first interview. Kieran took in his new surroundings. A camera with a red blinking light was mounted on a wall behind his interrogators. Another camera above his head offered a bird's eye view. Microphones were fixed to the walls. It was 10:03 a.m. on the 14th of June, 4 days after the first body part was recovered. Kieran began by describing his time living with Patricia O'Connor as the 10 years of hassle. He accused her of assaulting his kids and claimed she wanted Gus dead. "I think she was trying to kill us all," he said, "but I couldn't prove it. She had this glare, you know. She'd just stare at you." Once again, he was asked to go through the struggle with Patricia. And for the most part, his story didn't stray too far from the one he'd volunteered a few days earlier. insisting he had acted in self-defence when she attacked him with a hurley, telling him to get out. Kieran insisted he acted alone at all times. Nobody else knew. When asked why he didn't call for help if he was genuinely under attack, he said he was dazed by a hit to the head. "I'm not a bad person," he offered by way of explanation. "She hit me hard and winded me. She slipped and hit her head." June 2017 was a busy month for Dr. Michael Curtis, the then Deputy State Pathologist. Each of the 15 recovered body parts ended up on his table at the mortuary. Unsurprisingly, his examination of the skull gave him the most clues in relation to how Patricia had died. Blunt force trauma to the head. She was hit at least 3 times with something solid. One of the blows caused multiple fractures, such was the level of force used. Mercifully, death would have come quickly. That could have been when she fell, Kieran argued when this was put to him. But it couldn't have been. The damage caused didn't tally with his account of a fall. And for the first time, Kieran had nothing to say. Alongside the head found in the plastic bag were a pair of hands. The edges of the wrists and hands were ragged, suggesting they were probably removed with a handheld saw. That tallied with what Kieran had said about dismembering her body. However, a common feature noted by Dr. Curtis was that the rest of the parts had clean and sharply cut bone edges, suggestive of a more precise instrument having been used, most likely a power saw. The relevance of his observation wasn't lost on Detective Garda Conley. If Kieran used power tools to cut her up, then he was lying about doing it at the shallow grave. Power tools need power. Was it more likely that he did it at the house, the detective wondered? Kieran swore, hand on heart, that he didn't use power tools. He insisted that he had used a hacksaw to cut her up where she lay in a Wexford field. Another curious finding was that Patricia O'Connor did not show any signs of defence-type injuries. Still, Kieran stuck to his story. It was self-defence. He was left with no choice when she came at him with the hurley. He didn't mean it. He wasn't thinking straight when he buried her in the cornfield. He put it down to sheer panic and the fear of getting caught. Despite questions around the use of power tools and whether he truly acted alone, Detective Garda Conley felt there was enough evidence to get a murder charge across the line. His superiors agreed. So too did the DPP. Kieran Green was headed for the dock. As Kieran awaited trial, life carried on for Louise. Once the crime scene tape was lifted, she moved back into 66 Mountain View Park with her children. Keith Johnson was a regular presence, staying there several nights a week. Both of them were on Kieran's list of approved prison visitors. On the official form, he described Louise as his girlfriend and Keith Johnson as his friend. Although he wasn't well known to Patricia's relatives, Keith Johnson had been at Patricia's funeral, a small humanist ceremony held that July. It was a private affair, with only immediate family in attendance. Many of Patricia's friends and colleagues, including her old pal Breda, only learned of it after she had been cremated. They hadn't been invited. Louise wanted to keep it low-key. After the service, Patricia's sister Rita went over to Louise to give her a hug. It wasn't a normal hug. Louise's body went limp. She didn't hug her back. Stephanie was the same. Rita thought to herself how grief worked in mysterious ways. Even after Kieran Green appeared before a judge charged with the murder of Patricia O'Connor, the investigation team's work was far from complete. While they had enough evidence to charge him, they still needed to build a strong case and tie up any remaining loose ends. They found CCTV footage of Kieran Green at 2:16 a.m. on the 30th of May, pulling Patricia O'Connor's Toyota Corolla into a petrol station en route to Wexford and buying €40 worth of fuel. 4 hours later, he was spotted back outside the house at Mountain View, putting shoes and clothes into the bins. A thorough forensic examination of 66 Mountain View Park was undertaken. Detective Garda Connolly hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary when he first visited the house, but hoped the experts would have more luck. There were no signs of a struggle, but it looked like the walls in the hallway and bathroom had been freshly painted. The sloppy brush strokes suggested that the paint job was done in a hurry. To the naked eye, there was no sign of any blood on the bathroom floor, but it looked like it had been recently tiled. Forensic scientist John Hode snapped on a latex glove and reached for his Blue Star, a special chemical that can detect tiny traces of blood, even after washing. He squeezed the plastic trigger of his spray bottle. A clear mist swept over the tiles. Moments later, a small patch on the floor beside the bathtub lit up with a vivid blue glow. It was blood. Further analysis established that it came from a male source, but the sample was too small to develop a DNA profile. In fact, very little evidence of a forensic nature was recovered from the house. A child's hurley was found up against a fire guard in the kitchen, but like all of the other items seized from the house, it didn't assist the investigation in any meaningful way. Kieran Green's clean-up operation had been thorough. Like the house, not a trace of forensic evidence was retrieved from Patricia's Toyota Corolla, the car supposedly used to dispose of her remains, although the boot liner was missing. The car did provide one lead, a receipt for Mr. Price in Tala, dated June 9, 2017, the day before the first body part was discovered. Kieran couldn't remember what he bought in Mr. Price that day. The receipt refreshed his memory. The items included a jerry can, tow rope, vinyl tape, and some utility knives. Other receipts were also recovered from the house in the days after Patricia's disappearance, for things like coffee cream coloured paint, wood glue and grout. There were further purchases of rubble bags, a protection sheet, a jerry can, rope, knives, and a roll of extra strong black rubbish bags. Some of the items were purchased in pairs: 2 hacksaws, 2 small axes, 2 pairs of Wellington boots, and 2 pairs of builder's gloves. For investigators, this raised an obvious question. Was Kieran Green really acting alone? Using the timestamps on the receipts, Gardaí went shop to shop, pulling CCTV. Kieran Green was easily identified in the footage. But he wasn't alone. Keith Johnson, Louise's ex-boyfriend, was right there beside him. Initial door-to-door inquiries yielded little information, but during their rounds, Gardaí noticed a CCTV camera on the front of Patricia's next-door neighbour's house. From its vantage point, it appeared that the camera inadvertently covered a significant portion of the front of the O'Connors' property. Their neighbour, Sam Lynn, proved to be incredibly helpful. Although he hadn't witnessed anything unusual on the night in question, he was happy to give the Gardaí access to his camera system's hard drive. He also had another camera out the back that might be of use. Over 300 hours of footage was recovered from Sam Lynn's security system. His cameras captured much of the O'Connor property, front and back. It didn't take long for investigators to build a clearer picture of what happened on the day Patricia went missing. But the footage did more than that. It pointed them in an unexpected direction and brought others into sharp focus. Sam Lynn's CCTV footage captured Patricia out the back of her house just after 6:30 on the evening that she went missing. She was wearing a summer dress with a floral pattern on it. Less than 20 minutes later, Kieran Green was seen closing the curtains at the back of the house. Louise and Stephanie left 1 minute later with the kids. Gus left shortly afterwards. The curtains remained closed for almost 2 hours. Everyone, apart from Gus, returned home just before 9 p.m. At 9:34 p.m, a woman wearing jeans and a dark green jacket with the hood up was seen leaving the house. She had a suitcase in her hand. She moved in a sprightly manner. This tallied with the accounts of Patricia storming out. The quality of the footage was excellent, but with the hood up, it was hard to make out any distinguishing features of the figure seen leaving the house. 1 minute later, Louise appears in the frame. She walks down to the end of the driveway and glances to her left. This corroborated her account of what had happened that evening. The second camera, at the back of the house, told its own story. Kieran, Louise and Stephanie were seen chatting in the garden shortly before 9:34 p.m. when the figure left. Then, about half an hour later, just after 10 p.m, a woman entered the frame. She was carrying a suitcase with a coat draped over her arm. She walked into the house through the back door. Gardaí were satisfied that the figure seen leaving the house and returning through the back door about half an hour later was not Patricia O'Connor. They believed it was her granddaughter, Louise's eldest child, Stephanie. After reviewing the CCTV, Detective Garda Conley no longer believed Kieran Green's account. It was time to bring the others in. 3 months after Patricia was killed, Louise was arrested on suspicion of murdering her mother. She couldn't understand it. "You have someone for the murder," she said. "He put his hands up." Louise stuck to the account she had given in June and told Gardaí that there was no big plot. She described the theory that her daughter was the one seen leaving the house with the suitcase as ridiculous. She denied any involvement in her mother's killing and pointed the finger firmly at Kieran. "He's a fucking nut," she said. "He's probably gone doolally." When shown CCTV footage from her neighbour's house, she was adamant that the figure leaving at 9:34 p.m. was her mother. But her composure shifted when she realised just how much the cameras had captured, particularly at the back of the house. She was angry. She questioned whether it was even legal. She described it as disgraceful. When asked what she had been discussing with Kieran and Stephanie in the back garden, she said she couldn't remember. And when pressed on the figure seen entering the house from the rear later that night, she had no answer. "Who is it, Louise?" "I don't know," she replied. "Houdini, maybe?" Stephanie was also arrested. Like her mother, she stuck to her original version of events. Her first 2 interviews didn't reveal anything new. The 19-year-old remained remarkably composed. Her replies were measured, delivered slowly in a soft voice. She showed little emotion and didn't appear fazed. It was time to show her the CCTV footage. When asked who the figure entering the house from the back was, she replied, "Me, I guess." Her mother had asked her to fetch a bag from the shed and, "I do what I'm told," Stephanie said. But when pressed on the detail, her memory began to falter. She couldn't say what kind of bag it was, or even what colour it was. She couldn't say whether it was heavy, or who it belonged to. She couldn't remember. When asked directly if she had killed her Nana, she said no. She also denied helping anyone else. Stephanie's laptop had been recovered during the investigation. On the night of May 29th, 2017, Stephanie spent time watching YouTube videos, anime cartoons, and sending her CV to Penny's. However, all of this activity happened after 10 at night, when the figure reappeared in the back garden. Just down the corridor in the same Garda station, Patricia's husband Gus had also been arrested on suspicion of murder. He described the house as a happy home. Despite the breakdown of his marriage to Patricia, he said he still loved her. He told detectives it wasn't like her to go missing. He said he arrived home shortly after she had stormed out. He was tired, so he went to bed and slept through the night. He didn't know it, but Gardaí already knew he wasn't telling the truth. CCTV from the rear of Mr. Lynn's house showed he was up well past midnight. Despite that, he denied having anything to do with what had happened to Patricia and expressed regret that he wasn't there to help her when she needed him. With time running out on his final interview, Gus made an incredible admission. He went back on what he had said earlier. 66 Mountain View Park was not a happy house. Far from it. On the night in question, he told detectives Stephanie had woken him. He went downstairs and saw Patricia's body on the floor, wrapped in blankets. Louise and Kieran were there. Louise told him how Patricia had attacked Kieran. Gus's reaction was to turn around and go back to bed. He apologised for not coming forward sooner, but said he had been trying to protect his daughter and granddaughter. Gardaí didn't believe Keith Johnson was involved in Patricia's murder, but they had strong grounds to suspect he had played a role in the attempted cover-up. The self-described handyman had failed to mention one key detail in his voluntary statement: the shopping trip he took with Kieran Green in the days after Patricia disappeared. He too was brought in for questioning. Keith insisted that he had told Gardaí about his shopping trip to B&Q and Woody's, telling them, "Fuck off, lying swines." He told Gardaí he had repaired a step and some broken tiles in the bathroom, but denied doing so to destroy evidence. When asked about the nagging thought he had mentioned previously, that he might have been cleaning a crime scene, he said that he had been joking. Over time, prison life began to take its toll on Kieran Green. He became restless. He started to lose weight and wasn't sleeping. He was described as paranoid. His mother noticed a deterioration in his mental health. Something was up. He seemed particularly agitated after a visit from Louise and Keith on the 16th of November. Sleep was hard to come by after that. By then, he had been behind bars for over 5 months. A few weeks later, his solicitor contacted the investigation team. He said that his client wanted to speak with them, urgently. 2 detectives travelled to Cloverhill Prison to hear what he had to say. Kieran appeared nervous but eager to talk. He returned to the night of the 29th of May. Again he insisted Patricia had come at him first. There had been a struggle in the bathroom. He said he had disarmed her and struck her twice with the hurley. Nothing new. But then he claimed Gus entered the bathroom, holding a crowbar, and struck Patricia in the head, twice. He said Gus turned to him and said, "I'm defending you. You can take the rap for this." According to Kieran, Gus then helped him carry Patricia's body upstairs. Kieran told the investigating Gardaí that Louise knew what had happened. He claimed she was the one who cleaned the bathroom. And then he turned his attention to Keith Johnson. Keith wasn't there that night, he said, but he got involved days later. He spoke about the shopping trips and claimed Keith went back to the shallow grave with him. It was Keith, not him, who cut Patricia's body up. Keith helped dispose of the remains, stopping along the Wicklow mountains, leaving body parts behind. Afterwards, the 2 changed their clothes and drove home. On the way back, Kieran claimed Keith said, "This is on you, brother. I have a background in drugs. I can't get into any more trouble." Up to that point, the detectives had said very little. They let him talk. When he paused, they asked what had happened to the tools. He said they were dumped in a park in Tala. When asked why he was speaking now, Kieran said he had been set up. He believed Louise and Keith were back together and had turned on him. "They're out there," he said, "and I'm taking the rap for this." Armed with this new information, a search team was sent to the park where Kieran claimed that he threw away the tools used to dismember Patricia. A hacksaw with a black and white handle was found in some brambles. An identical-looking saw was found in some undergrowth near a river. There was hair on the blade. A small hatchet with an orange handle was also found nearby. The others were brought back in for questioning. Gus denied Kieran's claim that he was the killer. The rest maintained their innocence, but it didn't matter. A decision was made. All four would be charged with helping Kieran to get away with murder. And all five would stand trial. By the time their trial got underway in early 2020, the once crowded house at Mountain View Park was empty. Gus had moved in with his son, Richard. Louise and the children ended up in sheltered accommodation. Keith Johnson was staying with his mother in Tala. Everyone, apart from Kieran, was out on bail. Their legal teams were preparing for the trial. Back in Windgap, County Kilkenny, Patricia's younger sister Rita was doing the same. Rita was the baby of the family, the youngest of 13. She had fond memories of spending childhood summers in Dublin with Patricia. She remembered Patricia's home as a happy place, filled with laughter and singing. It was hard for her to imagine the horror that had unfolded there, but soon she'd have no choice. A trial date had been set. Rita would be there too, no matter what. Richard O'Connor, Patricia's son, would be there too, although he would have to wait outside the courtroom until he was called to give his evidence as a prosecution witness, to avoid prejudice. Kieran Green looked nervous on the opening day of his trial. He was in custody, so, unlike the others, he didn't have to run the gauntlet of photographers and TV crews gathered outside the court. Louise and the others tried to avoid the cameras. They wore hats and wrapped scarves around their faces. Stephanie wore sunglasses most days too. Gus made no attempt to conceal his identity. He stood out from the crowd, turning up on the opening day in a stylish suit and flat cap. Before jury selection got underway, the judge was told that there had been a significant development. Gus intended to plead guilty to reporting Patricia as a missing person, despite knowing she was already dead. When the initial shock lifted, Rita, Patricia's sister, felt a sense of relief, but also anger. Why had he left it so late, she wondered. After entering his plea, Gus moved out of the dock and into the public gallery. He would be dealt with at a later date. With Gus out of the picture for now, the others took up their positions in the dock. Stephanie didn't want to be anywhere near Kieran, so he sat apart from the rest on a small bench beside the packed enclosure. She took her place on the main bench, sandwiched between her mother Louise on one side and her father Keith on the other. In her hands, the classic courtroom novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. One by one, the jurors shuffled in. Once all 12 were in position, the prosecuting barrister, Roisin Lacey, rose to deliver her opening address. The jurors listened intently. Before they were sworn in the previous day, they had been warned by the judge not to sit on the jury if they were of a squeamish disposition. This was not a case for the faint-hearted. From the public benches, Patricia's siblings braced themselves. What lay ahead would not be easy. Miss Lacey told the jurors about the figure seen leaving the house just after 9:30 on the night of the murder. This, we say, was a ruse. As far as the state was concerned, Patricia O'Connor was already dead by then. That ruse, the jury heard, was how Stephanie and Louise came to be in the dock. Stephanie had dressed up as her grandmother, and Louise had told her to. At least, that was the case being advanced. The case against Keith Johnson centred on the so-called refurbishment works he carried out in the days and weeks that followed. While tiling the bathroom floor and painting a wall, it was alleged that he knew he was concealing or destroying evidence. The jury was told he also knew Patricia O'Connor was lying in a shallow grave when he went shopping for the tools used to dismember her. And that was crucial. His knowledge. Without it, that shopping trip might be dismissed as a remarkable but innocent coincidence. Then came Kieran Green's updated version of events. It was a lot to take in. Over the opening days of the trial, the jurors were shown maps and photos of the various crime scenes. Those who discovered the body parts also took the stand. Rita felt sorry for them. After they gave their evidence, she made a point of thanking them for coming forward. The court was shown the hacksaws and hatchet recovered during the search of the park in Tala. Receipts linked to their purchase were also made available. Aside from the gruelling post-mortem evidence, Rita found it particularly difficult to sit through Kieran's Garda interviews. In those interviews, Patricia's character was dragged through the mud. She was portrayed as a monster to live with. Kieran made outrageous claims that she insulted and beat his children. Rita knew better, but she couldn't help wondering what the jurors made of it all. Despite the circumstances of Patricia O'Connor's death and everything that happened thereafter, there was no hard forensic evidence. Only one small drop of blood was found between the tiles in the bathroom, and it wasn't Patricia's. No blood was found in her bedroom or in the boot of her car either. The case was largely circumstantial. The jurors could only rely on what they had heard from the witness box. They were also reminded that what one accused person said about another is not evidence. There was no room for speculation. Closing speeches would be important in terms of tying all the strands together. When the prosecuting barrister rose to her feet to deliver her final speech to the jury, it had been 33 days since she first addressed them. It was standing room only in the courtroom. Rita leaned forward on the hard bench. She wanted to catch every single word. Roisin Lacey described the whole thing like a jigsaw, with one piece fitting into the other through the evidence. Again, one of the main obstacles for her team was the lack of forensic evidence. Miss Lacey explained that away with reference to Kieran's admission about the clean-up afterwards and the removal of the boot liner from the car. She asked if the cover sheet bought in a DIY store was used to avoid leaving any forensic traces at the site of the shallow grave. That cover sheet was never recovered. Miss Lacey said the claim that Kieran Green was acting in self-defence didn't hold water. She said he bore Patricia an ill will, had a bad feeling against her, and killed her because he wanted to remedy an intolerable domestic situation. In relation to the case against Stephanie, she invited the jurors to carefully look at the CCTV footage of the figure with the suitcase leaving the house, and to compare it with the earlier footage of Patricia pottering around the back of the house. Their movements were very different, it was argued. If the jury was satisfied that the figure was in fact Stephanie, they would have to conclude that Louise lied to Gardaí when she identified it without hesitation as her mother. If that were so, then the back garden conversations between the trio of Louise, Stephanie and Kieran, captured by a next-door neighbour, would take on a very different significance. Then Miss Lacey turned to Keith Johnson and his comment to Gardaí that he had a nagging thought he might be cleaning up a crime scene. The timing mattered. He had that nagging thought before the shopping spree. If that's what he believed then, how could he fail to put two and two together as he moved through hardware stores with Kieran, picking up hacksaws, axes and other tools? She finished by accusing all four of lying and urged the jury to treat those lies as evidence of guilt. For his final speech, Kieran Green's barrister didn't have much to work with. He asked the jurors to disregard the initial confession and focus instead on the one he later gave while awaiting trial. He contended that the later version was the proper story of what had happened, and claimed his client was wrongly prosecuted. Kieran cut quite a pathetic sight as his barrister called into question whether he had the brains to pull off such a heinous crime on his own. He's such a sap, the jury was told. He's described as a moron. And yet here he is, Machiavelli himself, a mastermind. It doesn't add up. After the closing speeches, the jurors retired to consider their verdicts. It was 3:15 p.m. on Monday the 24th of February 2020. All that remained was to wait. After weeks of witnesses and the constant churn of evidence and legal argument, an eerie silence descended on the courtroom. The glowing red digits of the courtroom clock crept towards 4 p.m. Richard sat patiently in the public gallery next to his wife, Martina. She had been a rock to him throughout. Less than an hour later, the jury was sent home without reaching any verdicts. The following day was no easier. With no white smoke forthcoming, the jury was about to be sent home for a second night. By then, they had been deliberating for just under 4.5 hours. Like everyone else, Rita was gathering her belongings to leave when the jurors took off their coats and resumed their seats. Court reporters rushed back to their benches. The registrar asked the foreperson if the jury had reached a verdict on any of the counts. To everyone's surprise, she nodded. Yes, we have. Rita's husband squeezed her hand. Richard closed his eyes. You say that Kieran Green is guilty of murder. Is this the verdict of you all? The registrar asked. Yes, it is, came the reply. Rita smiled. Richard looked relieved. 1 down, 3 to go. Stephanie's fate was the next to be decided. Should she be acquitted, the case against her mother might well have collapsed too. It took the jury another 4 hours to find Stephanie guilty. Next to her in the dock, Louise's composure shifted. Aside from the upset of seeing her daughter convicted of helping a murderer, she knew the case against her remained very much alive. Louise was convicted 2 hours later. She didn't flinch. Keith Johnson was the last man standing. In the end, the jury had just one charge to consider against him: the allegation that he had helped Kieran buy the tools used to dismember Patricia. With the others convicted, Keith cut a lonely figure in the dock. But he didn't have long to wait. He was found guilty the following morning. With tears in her eyes, Rita fell into the arms of her siblings. Justice at long last, she thought. At the sentencing hearing a few months later, Richard told the judge his mother was not the horrible person the others had tried to portray during the trial. She was, he said, a kind, caring and loving person. He wondered aloud why his mother had to die because of the utter selfishness and laziness of others. The judge imposed the mandatory life sentence on Kieran Green for murder. Gus, whose behaviour was described as disgraceful and a betrayal of his wife, was jailed for 18 months. Stephanie received the same sentence for her role in the attempted cover-up. Louise was handed a longer term of 2.5 years. The judge found she bore a greater degree of responsibility for the ruse. Despite Kieran's claims, the judge accepted there was no evidence that Keith Johnson had dismembered Patricia O'Connor. For helping Kieran evade justice after the murder, he was jailed for 3 years. Outside court afterwards, Richard expressed his disappointment with the sentences handed down, but accepted that no sentence would be long enough for the crimes that they had committed. His parting words lingered in the air. May they live with this on their consciences for the rest of their lives. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lines of Enquiry. We have an email address, linesofenquiry@goloudnow.com, and we would love to hear from you, so get in touch. Whether you have a story you think we should cover, or just want to let us know how you felt about an episode. That email is linesofenquiry@goloudnow.com. Or if you're on Instagram, you can follow us on @linesofenquirypodcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, leaving a rating or review really helps. We've now reached almost 5,000 5-star ratings across Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Those responses make a real difference. They help new listeners find the series, and I'm genuinely humbled by the response we've gotten. Thank you. Your support helps us to tell these stories. Make sure to like or follow the podcast in your podcast app and hit the notifications button so you'll know every time a new episode is released. Lines of Enquiry is presented by me, John Sweetman. The podcast is created by Darren Cleary. Our executive producer is Owen Brennan. Our producers are Siobhan Maguire and Siobhan Walsh. Sound editing and design is by Neil Kavanagh, with additional editing support from Ed Smith. This episode was written by Frank Graney and edited by Siobhan Walsh and Owen Brennan. Social media, marketing, video and legal support comes from the GoLoud team. In the end, everything done in the dark comes to light.